What if I told you that the voice inside your head right now, the one that dictates what is right, what is wrong, what is acceptable, and what is shameful, isn't actually yours? What if the deepest beliefs you hold about money, success, relationships, and morality were installed in your brain before you were old enough to defend yourself? Most of us walk through life under the illusion that we are free thinkers. We believe that we make our own choices. We believe that our desires are our own. But the terrifying, uncomfortable truth of human psychology is that the vast majority of us are living inside an invisible prison of social conditioning. We are running on software that someone else coded. We do what we're told to do. We chase the goals that society tells us are valuable, and we feel an overwhelming, crippling sense of guilt whenever we try to step off the designated path. Look around you. Look at the people you know. How many of them are truly happy? And how many of them are simply acting out a script that was handed to them by their parents, their culture, and their environment? Over 140 years ago, one of history's greatest observers of human behavior wrote a definitive, step-by-step guide on how to break out of this psychological prison. He disguised it as a children's adventure story about a boy and a runaway slave floating down the Mississippi River. The author was Mark Twain, and the book was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. But make no mistake, if you read this book simply as a piece of classic literature, you are missing the point entirely. This book is not just a novel. It is a profound, advanced psychological masterclass in discovering your true self, rejecting toxic societal norms, and finding absolute mental freedom in a world that demands conformity. If you have ever felt like you don't fit in, if you have ever felt suffocated by the expectations of your family or your career, or if you simply feel a quiet, nagging sense that the life you are living does not actually belong to you, you are in the exact right place. By the end of this video, you will understand the exact mechanisms society uses to program your mind. You will understand why you feel guilty when you try to improve yourself. And more importantly, I am going to give you the exact actionable blueprint for how to build your own raft, escape the noise of the masses, and completely rewire your internal moral compass. Get comfortable. Eliminate your distractions. Close your other tabs. You are about to take a journey down the river of your own subconscious. Let's dive in. Section 1. The Civilized Trap and the Jungian Persona. To understand how to get free, we first have to understand the exact nature of the trap. The book opens with our protagonist, a young boy named Huck Finn, living under the care of the widow Douglas. The widow is a wealthy, respected, and entirely well-meaning woman who has made it her personal mission to civilize Huck. What does it mean to civilize someone? In the context of the story, she forces Huck into stiff, uncomfortable clothes that make it hard for him to breathe. She makes him sit upright at a formal dining table. She forces him to memorize arbitrary rules of etiquette, teaches him from books he does not understand, and demands that he conform to the proper ways of high society. Huck hates it. He says he feels all cramped up. He cannot sleep. He cannot think. He feels completely disconnected from his own nature. To understand what is happening here, we have to look at the work of the famous Swiss psychiatrist, Dr. Carl Jung. Jung introduced a foundational psychological concept called the persona. The word persona originally comes from Latin, meaning the theatrical mask worn by actors on a stage. According to Jung, the persona is the mask we wear to fit into society. It is the compromise you make between your true, authentic self and the expectations of the external world. It's the version of yourself you present at the corporate office. It's the polite, agreeable smile you give to people you actually despise. It is society's rule book imprinted onto your behavior. The widow Douglas represents the relentless force of society, constantly trying to force the persona onto Huck. She is telling him the exact same thing society tells you every single day. To be valuable, to be considered good, you must look like us, you must act like us, you must consume what we consume, and you must think exactly like us. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau famously wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Rousseau believed that human beings are inherently good and peaceful in their natural state, but that modern civilization, with its obsession with status, property, and arbitrary rules, corrupts us. It chains us to the opinions of others. Huck represents what we will call the natural mind. The natural mind is your intuition. It's your raw gut feeling. It's the authentic part of you that knows when something feels inherently wrong, even if every single person around you is telling you that it is right. Look deeply at your own life right now. Let's do a mental audit. How much of what you do every single day is dictated by the Widow Douglas of your world? Are you working a job that drains your soul simply because society told you it's a respectable career path? Are you taking on massive amounts of debt to buy a house or a car you don't actually care about just to impress people you don't even like? Are you constantly policing your own words and thoughts so you don't upset the social consensus? Are you wearing the stiff, uncomfortable clothes of modern civilization and feeling cramped up inside? Here is a psychological truth you must accept. Your anxiety, your chronic burnout, your lack of energy, and your low-level depression are very often not medical conditions. They are symptoms. They are the desperate cries of your natural mind, screaming that it is suffocating under the crushing weight of your persona. When you spend your entire life pretending to be someone you are not, your body keeps the score. You become exhausted because living behind a mask requires a massive, constant expenditure of psychological energy. Huck Finn realizes early on that if he stays in that house, if he continues to wear the mask of the civilized boy, his spirit will die. He knows he has to leave. But before he can escape the polite prison of the Widow Douglas, he is dragged into an even darker psychological trap. Section 2. P. Finn, Generational Trauma, and the Crab Bucket. Huck is kidnapped by his biological father, Pap Finn. Pap is an abusive, bitter, deeply resentful, and violent alcoholic. He locks Huck in a secluded cabin in the woods. While the Widow Douglas represented the polite, suffocating rules of society, Pap Finn represents something much more visceral: generational trauma, the psychology of resentment, and the crab bucket mentality. When Pap discovers that Huck has been learning how to read and write, and that he is sleeping in a real bed and wearing clean clothes, Pap does not celebrate his son's progress. Instead, he becomes violently enraged. He beats Huck. He tears up his books. He screams at him to stop trying to be better than his family and forbids him from ever going back to school. Why would a father attack his own son for improving his life? To understand this, we look to the psychologist Alfred Adler, who pioneered the concept of the inferiority complex. Adler understood that when a person feels deeply inadequate and refuses to take responsibility for their own failures, they develop a toxic resentment toward anyone who is succeeding. When you place a group of crabs in a bucket, you don't need to put a lid on it. If one crab tries to climb out and escape, the other crabs will physically reach up, grab it, and pull it back down into the bucket to suffer with the rest of them. Let me pause here because this is a harsh reality that many of you watching this are facing right now. When you decide to wake up, when you start reading books, when you start working out, when you start building a business, or when you simply change your mindset to be more positive, the people in your immediate environment will very often attack you. They probably won't do it physically like Pap Finn, but they will do it psychologically. They will use passive aggression. They will say things like, "Oh, who do you think you are now?" They will mock your ambition. They will tell you that your dreams are unrealistic. They will try to drag you back into the gossip, the complaining, and the mediocrity that defines their lives. Why do they do this? Because your growth holds up a terrifying mirror to their stagnation. Your progress makes them painfully aware of their own failures and their own lack of effort. As long as you are failing alongside them, they can blame the world. But the second you start succeeding, you prove that escape is possible, which means their failure is their own fault. And human beings will do almost anything to avoid taking responsibility for their own lives. Huck realizes something incredibly profound while locked in that cabin with his father. He cannot heal and he cannot grow in the exact environment that is actively trying to destroy him. You cannot reason with toxicity. You cannot negotiate with people who are deeply committed to misunderstanding you. You cannot save the other crabs while you are still stuck in the bucket. So, what does Huck do? He executes one of the most brilliant psychological escapes in literature. He fakes his own death. He slaughters a wild pig, spreads its blood around the cabin to make it look like he was murdered, and slips away down the river. He literally and symbolically kills off his old identity so he can finally escape. Psychologically speaking, this is exactly what you must do to achieve true transformation. You have to let the old version of you die. You have to stop seeking the validation and approval of the people who represent your past. You have to mourn the loss of the relationships that are holding you back. And you have to boldly walk away from the cabin of your own trauma so you can finally step into your future. Section 3. The danger of the right thing and the tyranny of the superego, what we reach the absolute core of the book. This is the central psychological crisis of the narrative, and it contains perhaps the most important lesson you will ever learn about how your own brain functions. Huck escapes to Jackson's Island, where he bumps into Jim, a slave who has run away from the widow Douglas's sister, Miss Watson. Huck and Jim team up. They find a raft, and they begin floating down the vast, dark expanse of the Mississippi River, seeking freedom. But almost immediately, a brutal, exhausting war breaks out inside Huck's mind. You see, society had programmed Huck from birth to believe that slaves were not human beings. The church, the school, the law, and the polite adults of his world had all taught him that slaves were pieces of property. Society had drilled into his brain that helping a runaway slave was the ultimate sin, a crime against God, the law, and humanity itself. As they float down the river, Huck's conscience begins to torture him. He loses sleep. He feels physically sick with guilt. He feels like a disgusting, low-life criminal. He literally believes that he is a wicked person whose soul is destined for eternal damnation simply because he is sitting on a raft next to his friend. Let me say that again, and I want you to listen to me very closely. Huck's conscience is relentlessly attacking him for doing the right thing. How is this possible? How can our own conscience lead us so completely astray? Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, mapped out the human psyche into 3 parts. The id, our primal desires. The ego, our conscious self. And the superego. The superego is what we commonly call our conscience. But Freud realized something terrifying about the superego. It is not an objective, divine moral compass. The superego is simply a psychological sponge. It absorbs the morals, the rules, the prejudices, and the expectations of your parents and your specific culture. Here is the shocking truth that most people never realize. Your conscience is merely a mirror of your environment. If you grow up in a sick, toxic, and twisted society, you will develop a sick, toxic, and twisted conscience. We see this happening in the modern world every single day. Have you ever felt incredibly guilty for setting a healthy boundary with an abusive family member? Your mind tells you, but they are family. You have to be loyal. That guilt is not real. It is your programmed superego trying to pull you back into conformity. Have you ever felt deeply ashamed for taking a weekend off to rest and do nothing because the hustle culture of social media tells you that you must be grinding and producing 24 hours a day? Your mind tells you that you are lazy and worthless. That shame is not real. It is false guilt installed by a capitalist society that only values you for your economic output. Have you ever felt anxious for not wanting the traditional life path? The corporate job, the mortgage, the 2.5 kids, feeling like you are somehow failing at life because your desires don't match the billboard advertisements. That is the widow Douglas in your head. That is your superego acting as a prison guard. The climax of Huck's psychological journey and the climax of the entire novel happens when Huck can no longer take the guilt. He decides he has to do the right thing. He writes a letter to Miss Watson telling her exactly where Jim is so she can come capture him. Huck holds the paper in his hand. For a fleeting second, his superego rewards him. He feels washed clean of sin. He feels like he is finally doing what society wants. He feels like a good boy. But then he stops. His natural mind takes over. He begins to think about the reality in front of him, not the programming in his head. He remembers Jim's overwhelming kindness. He remembers how Jim took the night watches on the raft so Huck could sleep. He remembers their deep, authentic human connection. He realizes through his own direct experience that Jim is a man, a father, and a friend. Huck looks at the letter. He looks at the programming of society. And he says the most famous, powerful line in the history of American literature. "All right then, I'll go to hell." And he tears the letter up. He decides that if society's version of heaven requires him to betray his own soul, to ignore his own intuition, and to sell out his best friend, he would rather go to hell. He fully and completely rejects his social programming forever. He chooses his own internal ethics over society's external morality. This is the ultimate moment of human self-actualization. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote extensively about this exact phenomenon. Nietzsche said that to become a true individual, an Übermensch, or Superman, you must undergo a transvaluation of all values. You must take every single thing society has told you is good or evil and examine it for yourself. To become truly free, you must be willing to disappoint society. You must be willing to let people misunderstand you. You must be willing to let the masses judge you. You must be willing to be the bad guy in their completely fabricated story so that you can be the hero, the author, and the master of your own. Section 4. The Madness of the Shore and the Psychology of Groupthink. To drive this psychological lesson home, Mark Twain uses a brilliant repeating structural metaphor throughout the entire book. It is the contrast between the raft and the shore. Every time Huck and Jim are out on the raft, floating down the center of the river, there is profound peace. Out on the water, they strip away their societal roles. They are no longer a white boy and a black slave, they are just two human beings surviving together. The raft represents clarity, mindfulness, and the untouched natural mind. But the river requires supplies. And every single time Huck and Jim are forced to step off the raft and onto the shore, they encounter absolute, unhinged madness. In one famous sequence, Huck meets two aristocratic families, the Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons. These are wealthy, civilized, church-going people, but they are engaged in a bloody, violent, multi-generational feud. They bring loaded rifles to church on Sunday to hear sermons about brotherly love, and then they murder each other in the streets on Monday. When Huck asks a young boy from the family why they are fighting, the boy admits something terrifying. He doesn't even know. They have been killing each other for so many years that everyone has forgotten how the feud even started. But they keep killing simply because it is what their group does. This is Twain's glaring warning about groupthink and blind tribalism. When you attach your identity to a collective group, whether it is a political party, a religious dogma, a corporate culture, or an online social movement, you essentially stop thinking for yourself. You outsource your critical thinking to the mob. You adopt the enemies of the group without question. You absorb the hatred of the group without logic. You stop asking why. Later on the shore, Huck and Jim are hijacked by two traveling con artists who call themselves the King and the Duke. These men go from town to town, putting on fake plays, pretending to be reformed pirates, and impersonating dead relatives to steal inheritance money from grieving families. The most disturbing part isn't that the King and the Duke are liars. It's how easily the crowds on the shore fall for the lies. The con artists represent the corrupt politicians, the sensationalist media, the fake gurus, and the manipulative influencers of our modern world. They are people who have realized that the masses do not think logically. The masses think emotionally. And if you can trigger their fear, their greed, or their outrage, you can control them completely. The shore represents the external world. It is the infinite scroll of social media. It is the toxic 24-hour news cycle engineered to keep you angry. It is the water cooler gossip at your office. It is loud, it is chaotic, it is deeply insecure, and it desperately wants to drag you into its meaningless drama. If you spend all your time on the shore, if your mind is constantly hooked into the opinions, the outrage, and the expectations of the masses, you will slowly lose your mind. You will become anxious, angry, divided, and exhausted. You will become a pawn in a game you don't even realize you are playing. Section 5. The river as the flow state. So what is the alternative? The alternative is the river. In Eastern philosophy, particularly in Taoism, there is a concept called Wu Wei, which roughly translates to effortless action or non-doing. It does not mean being lazy, it means aligning yourself with the natural flow of the universe rather than constantly fighting against it. The Mississippi River in Twain's novel represents this Taoist concept of the way. The river only flows in one direction, forward. It does not care about the feuds of the Grangerfords. It does not care about the laws of the Widow Douglas. It simply moves. When Huck and Jim are on the raft, they are in what modern psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls the flow state. They are completely present. They watch the stars. They watch the sunrise. They are not dwelling on the traumas of their past, and they are not having anxiety attacks about their future. They are simply existing in the now. The raft is a psychological buffer. It is a boundary that keeps the madness of the shore at a safe distance. You must build a raft in your own life. You cannot survive the modern world if you are constantly standing on the shore, letting the waves of other people's opinions crash over you. You need a vehicle of mindfulness. You need a dedicated space and a dedicated practice that separates you from the hive mind of society. Section 6. Building your raft, the actionable protocol. We have covered the theory, the psychology, and the philosophy. Now, how do we actually apply this? How do we stop being the pawns of society and start thinking for ourselves? How do we tear up the letter and find our own freedom? If you want the mental clarity of Huckleberry Finn, you must undergo a systematic process of psychological deprogramming. I have distilled this into a framework I call the 21-Day River Protocol. If you commit to this for the next 3 weeks, the way you view the world will fundamentally, permanently change. Step 1. The Why Audit. For the next 21 days, I want you to become ruthlessly observant of your own beliefs. I want you to audit your mind. When you feel a strong emotion, especially a sense of obligation, a feeling of, I should do this, or a wave of guilt, stop exactly where you are and ask yourself one question. Where did I learn to feel this way? If your answer is, because that's just what people do, or because my parents told me to, you have identified a piece of societal programming. It is not your belief. It is a virus installed by the shore. Challenge it. Tear up the script. Make a conscious decision to act based on logic and intuition, not inherited dogma. Step 2. Embrace the false guilt. When you finally start living for yourself, your internal programming will fight back violently. When you say no to a demanding boss, when you skip a toxic family gathering, or when you invest time in a passion project instead of mindlessly grinding for a corporation, your superego will punish you with immense guilt. Expect it. Welcome it. You must recognize that this guilt is not a signal that you are doing something wrong. It is simply the friction of your old, programmed identity burning away. When you feel the guilt of not conforming, do what Huck Finn did. Smile, look that programming dead in the eye, and say, all right then, I'll go to hell. Learn to be comfortable with society's disapproval. Step 3. Radical solitude, disconnecting from the shore. You cannot hear the quiet voice of your natural mind while the shore is screaming in your ear. For the next 21 days, you must force yourself onto the raft. This means you must practice radical solitude. I want you to spend exactly 20 minutes every single day in absolute, uncompromising silence. No podcasts playing in the background, no lo-fi study beats, no YouTube videos, and absolutely, under no circumstances, your phone. Just you, sitting in a room with your own thoughts. At first, this is going to be terrifying. Your brain will panic. You will realize just how chaotic, loud, and programmed your mind really is. You will feel the urge to grab your phone to distract yourself. Do not do it. Sit through the discomfort. If you sit there long enough, day after day, the chaotic noise of society will begin to fade. The voices of your parents, your boss, and the media will quiet down. And finally, beneath all of that conditioned static, you will hear the quiet, steady, unbreakable voice of your own intuition. You will finally meet yourself. The choice is yours. Mark Twain didn't just write a story about a boy floating down a river in the 1800s. He wrote a timeless, urgent manifesto for human freedom. Society wants you to be predictable. It wants you to stay on the shore. It wants you to fight in its meaningless, manufactured feuds so you stay distracted. It wants you to buy its products so you stay in debt. And it wants you to follow its rules so you remain easy to manage. It will use the weapons of guilt, shame, fear, and ostracization to keep you exactly where you are. But you always have a choice. You can choose to stay in the stiff, uncomfortable clothes of civilization. You can live out the rest of your days feeling cramped up, performing for an audience of people who do not actually care about you, until the day you die, having never really lived. Or you can push the raft out into the water. You can trust your own moral compass. You can navigate the dark, uncertain river of your own life. You can look at the rules that make no sense, tear them up, and build a reality of your own design. The programming runs deep. But your natural mind is infinitely stronger. If this deep dive shifted your perspective today, do me a favor. Share this video with someone who feels trapped by the heavy expectations of others. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is one societal rule, one piece of false programming that you are going to tear up today? Remember, you are not just watching videos about self-improvement. You are actively reprogramming your mind. Build your raft, protect your peace. And I'll see you in the next video. Keep floating.